This video was originally going to be a simple DCC decoder installation on a non-DCC ready in-scale locomotive, but it turned into a little bit of a headache. Okay, let's back up a little bit. A few episodes ago, I bought this locomotive off of eBay and a decoder to install with it. My intention was to install this as just any other tutorial. I'd actually purchased quite a few old Ather Blue Box locos on the cheap to get some practice with the wires and making sure that I was confident in doing DCC installations, and I've done plenty of them now. So I began shooting the video like a tutorial, like I would any other. And the decoder did work in the way it was supposed to initially, so here you go. The first thing here is that we need to get the shell off. Now we do have a coupler that is hooked underneath that, so we do have to be careful. So we're going to go ahead and pull the shell off right here. And it just has two tabs, and you just kind of pull them apart and just kind of let the shell fall out. Now you have to be careful with the coupler. The coupler sometimes can be a little bit difficult, so we're just going to gently wiggle it out. And what we can see right here, now different manufacturers have manufactured locomotives in different ways, so we're just going to put the shell off in a safe place, and we're going to flip this over right here. This locomotive uses its weights as its electrical current between the track and the motor. So you're not going to see any wires in this one. Some of them do have wires, and actually when I do other conversions that you guys are going to see, you're going to see those wires. But for now, we need to go ahead and get everything opened up so I can show you exactly how this locomotive works. This locomotive has 3 screws that holds it together. And what I'll do is I just unscrew it, dump the screw into the magnetic tray, and we're going to take that out. And I'm also going to take the shell. Oh, and the locomotive just came right apart there, so we're going to need to put that back together. One moment, please. Okay, we're back. I got the locomotive back together. Okay, so here it's actually pretty simple. We have worm gears for each of the trucks. The trucks do have electrical pickups, and those are actually, they're really hard to see because they're painted black with everything else, but there are little pickups right here, and there are identical ones on the other side. And then of course we have our motor. Now, you see these little connections right here. This is what we have that connect the wire, or connect the motor rather, to the weights that are in there, and these actually function as the connection to the track. So again, there's no wires. You just have these little, you have basically these connectors which also touch the metal weights right here, which then have a connection pad to the motor. So the big thing that we have to do with DCC is we have to put the decoder in between the track connection and the motor. And luckily it's fairly easy. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. The first thing we need to do is just pull the motor right out, and the motor will just come right out. So we're going to pull the trucks out first. And there's literally nothing holding this motor in. I'm going to grab, this is the plastic end for the screws. We have the headlight right here, which actually just connects to each side. I'm not sure if that will pick up, but you have little connections right there. We're actually going to put in an LED, so we don't even need to worry about that anymore. And now we can take the motor out. And the motor may take some wiggling, but there we go. Now it is out. Make sure we don't lose that. If you want to test it, you can just hook up like a 9-volt battery to it just to make sure that it works. I'm going to hook up a 5-volt power supply just to make sure that it works. This is my very simple tester. It is simply just a barrel plug adapter that I can plug into any power supply, and I've just got 2 wires with DuPont connectors on it. I'm using a 5-volt power supply just to make sure that I don't blow anything. So we're just going to go ahead and tap it and test it, make sure it works. You can see it's moving. All right, we have a working motor. So let's get on to the actual connections that it has. So basically each side's going to have one on the top and one on the bottom right here. And as you can see, we have this little pad right here. And what we need to do is eliminate that pad, because that is the electrical connection that we need to put the decoder in between. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to take some nippers, and I would use some nippers that you don't mind breaking. You can also file it. I can show you how easy. It just takes a little longer to file, so you can just do like this. I have nippers that I don't mind burning, and I'm just gonna, woo! Be careful, because that just shot into another room. Then you will still probably need a file just to file it down a little bit extra.
All right, so now we need to just make sure that we have electrical isolation. And what I have is basically different various widths of Kapton tape, which are really great for DCC installations like this when you have tight spaces and you need to do some electrical isolation. So I have some really thin Kapton tape, and I'm gonna just trim that off. And what I like to do is I'll just pull off a big strip like that. And I'm going to take my tweezers, actually. If you have smaller hands than me, you're more than welcome to use your fingers. And I'm just going to put a strip right there just to prevent any connection happening between the motor and the frame. And then we'll want to do the same thing on the bottom pad as well. Now those are electrically isolated and we can begin doing our connections to the motor. Let's switch gears for a second and talk about the decoder. The decoder is the Digitrax DZ126. It is one of their smallest decoders, and that's why I picked it, so that I would have the best chance of fitting it into the body of this locomotive, and it's still going to be pretty tight. Just a little foreshadowing there. Okay, let's talk about some of the connections we're going to have first. The first connections we're going to have are the black wire and the red wire. The black wire is going to go to the left side rail when you're facing forward, and the red wire is going to go to the right side rail. Now for the motor, we're going to be using the orange and gray wires. Orange is going to go to positive and gray is going to go to negative. So in this case, typically I always see that the negative is the bottom of the motor and the positive is the top of the motor. So we're actually just going to solder these directly on. So we're going to look at how much length we need, because the decoder is going to sit right back here and I want to minimize how much wire we have. So what I want to do right there is I'm going to estimate the length, and I'm going to give it a little bit extra. Go ahead and trim it. And these wires are so small that my wire strippers aren't really going to do anything, so I'm just going to take it and trim it with the nippers. Now comes the fun part. We are going to solder our wires. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to tin the wires. I'm going to do just a little bit of tinning. Just a little bit. And then I'm also going to tin the little pad right here as well. And there we go. We've made one connection to our motor. So next up we're going to need our orange wire. All right, so now we have the wire connections made. I'm going to just take some Kapton tape and tape down the plastic insulators that keep the motor really from touching the frame and causing a short. All right, and now we can actually stick this back in the chassis. So let's go ahead and do that. There we go. And I can go ahead and put my trucks back in, and we can actually go ahead and seal this completely up.
This is the beginning of things getting just a little bit difficult, not really that bad, but originally I was going to use the body that was used for the track power pickup and just connect the wire to the body itself. But when I tried that, I just wasn't getting enough current to drive the motors. So what I ended up doing was having to connect the wires directly to the track pickups. Track pickups are typically a piece of metal that sits usually right between the wheel and the main frame of the truck, so right there on the inside, and touches the metal axle of that side. Now, the wheels on the trucks are usually electrically isolated in the middle. These are isolated by the gears on them, and this little piece of metal, you just got to scratch it up a little bit and you can solder a wire right to it. The most difficult part, though, I actually found was getting the little pickup pad back in the proper location. That was a little bit tough to do right there. I would use some tweezers if I were you. And I stripped some wire off of another DCC decoder project that I'd had from a while ago to do the rear track pickups, and I'm just going to have them connect up top.
The nice thing about it is there's just enough gap where those wires feed through nice and neat.
The next thing I did was just get everything sealed up nice and compact as much as I could. I got all of the track feeders connected and sealed up with Kapton tape so that they didn't short out, and then it was off to the next step.
Next thing we're going to do is wire up our headlight, and I have this little bitty LED. So for the lights on this decoder, it has a blue common positive right here, and then the white is the negative for the headlight. So we're going to be connecting these two. I went ahead and soldered a 1K resistor on there to make sure that the LED doesn't burn out soon, because I do not want to have to do this again. And now I'm just going to tin this, and we're going to go ahead and attach the LED. Tinning is a really great thing. It makes soldering so much easier. So when you're soldering, especially with tiny stuff like this, make sure you tin it. Oh. Does that work? Oh, all right. So now we have an LED set up. We can go ahead and test this out.
Using some slightly wider Kapton tape, I sealed everything up and got it as compact as possible before putting the shell back on, because I need to get everything. There is literally just a few millimeters of space in between the top of the shell and the top of the body. So next it was time to just put the shell back on and give this thing a test run.
The bottom line is that the decoder installation went mostly to plan. Everything worked on the electronic side of things. I had everything wired up and ready to go. I was pretty excited, actually. I've done quite a few HO-scale decoder installations, but never a non-DCC ready in-scale install. And when everything fit, and it was a tight fit, I was super happy. So I stuck it on the track and powered it up. The light came on, and then it made a hum. That hum we all know too well, that means that something was not right. And through some trial and error, I actually think I've managed to figure out what the issue is, but what steps did I use to figure out that issue? The first thing I did was strip the engine down and made sure that the motor itself was fine with DCC power. Now, obviously you saw me test it with DC, but it ran fine on DCC as well. I connected some leads directly to the decoder from the track and just bypassed the everything just straight to the motor. And everything worked great. This was great news. It meant that the issue was between the motor and the wheels. And that's a lot easier to figure out than an electronics issue. So I began testing even more. I eventually isolated the issue to the front truck of the locomotive. I did this by removing the front drive shaft and seeing the locomotive immediately begin lurching forward when I powered it, only with the rear truck being attached to the motor. Now I just had to check the worm gear and all of the other gears within the gearbox. The worm gears seemed to spin the gears just fine, so I removed the bottom plate of the truck and examined the gears that are attached to the axles, and I noticed one of the teeth on one of the gears was slightly more spread out than the rest of them, and upon a closer look there was a crack in the plastic gear. Now, since I had isolated the issue to the gears within this particular truck, I had already gone to Bachmann's website and purchased enough parts to rebuild both of the gearboxes. And I'm still probably going to do that just to be safe. But before I do that, I will see if this was really the issue. And I will certainly do a whole video on that. I have some more work to do on the locomotive, such as new couplers, but again, that is another video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this helps you if you run into an issue similar to this for problem solving, converting an old DC locomotive. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, and happy railroading.